social, economic, cultural, and scientific trends that have defined the Western world for 5 centuries is now leading in new directions. What were the ideals that define the Western world? We are now saying that's old business. We're now moving in some new direction. They go on to say the primary purpose of social studies is to help young people develop the ability to make informed and reasoned decisions. Who gets to define informed and reasoned decisions? For the public good as citizens of a culturally diverse, democratic society in an interdependent world. Now, this is all marketing gobbledygook that has real meaning underneath it. Sounds bad to you and I who are a little more in tune than the rest of the world into what this stuff really means. But keep in mind, we spent millions of focused market research to come up with the language to mask the agenda. The agenda is exposed by looking at the curriculum. But first I want to play a little video clip of the senior director of the Mid-Continental Regional Education Laboratory in 1989 as she revealed to the National Governors Association the agenda for education. She's going to list 3 important aspects of what education is about. Listen to for the 3.
It seems to me that far too much of our efforts have been focused on the issue of let's find a short-term fix and fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society. What is happening in America today and what is happening in Kansas and the Great Plains is not simply a chance situation in the usual winds of change. What it amounts to is a total transformation of our society. And the issue for most children and the issues for the society is that what has changed in education today is that we no longer see the teaching of facts and information as the primary outcome of education. During the past 10 years, we've been going through a reform movement. And that reform movement began with the governors of the nation, and basically what their concern was that they began to understand the very close relationship between economic development and human capital.
Did you catch the 3 parts? Number 1, the total transformation of society. Number 2, facts and information, knowledge, is no longer the primary purpose of education. And number 3, the close connection between economic, let's call it sustainable development, and human capital, that is labor, human resource labor for a planned economy. Now, it shouldn't surprise you then to see this information in the Minnesota 72 plan. She said we've been working on this for over a decade. That was in 89. It goes back at least to 79. I have information that goes back to 1933, folks. It says environmental education is a new way of thinking. It is a lifelong process. How many have heard the term lifelong learning? It goes on to say that it requires basic cultural changes and the responsibilities must be shared by governments, schools, and businesses. Now, the way this is being done is through something called public-private partnerships. We've heard a little bit of that term. But this is a public-private partnership between government, education, and the economy or business. Reinventing government, education, and business. Now, the interesting thing to ask here is, what happens when you're in partnership with an 800-pound gorilla? The purpose of the other partners is to feed the gorilla. And that is, in fact, what is happening and what we're seeing taking place. Now, the first piece was Goals 2000 that finalized the plan, that changed the purpose of education in content. I often say there's only 2 problems with education. It's content and its structure. We fix those 2 things and we fix education. The content piece came through Goals 2000. That locked the entire curriculum. It gave us a national curriculum, a national test, a national teacher's licensing rule that all 50 states signed on to merely because of the promise of grant money. The second piece was School to Work, also passed in '94. School to Work created the partnership between education and the economy. Knowledge is now derived at structurally what the planners will see the future economic needs are going to be and retrofit our children into specific career clusters. How many have heard the term career clusters? The schools here in Maine are being restructured as well. They were one of the 10 pilot states along with Minnesota. By the way, under No Child Left Behind, they have now renamed career clusters smaller learning communities. Doesn't that sound nice? Nice. And those are the grants now that your districts are applying for to help implement the same system. Now the third piece is less known. That is the Workforce Investment Act. That created the state and federal boards, and it created the local investment boards in the various regions of your state to manage the whole thing. Now this Workforce Investment Act, the only thing I want to say about it is it brought in a new term that you need to understand: appointed representatives. Now think about that a minute. The boards are made up of appointed representatives of business, representatives of teachers, representatives of parents, representatives of labor, representatives. The boards are by law have to be 51% business representative, but they're all appointed. You see, in a free society, those groups should get to vote and elect their own representation. In a government tyranny, representatives are appointed to represent your interests. Read your documents. I found it all over Maine. All over Maine. Every single one of your boards, whether it's the sustainability boards, anything, is appointed representation. That alone is worthy of exposure. Now let's move on. No Child Left Behind locked the entire thing in place at the pretense of sunsetting Goals 2000 and School to Work. Keep in mind, Goals 2000 and School to Work were originally passed with sunset dates. They were just a little late in sunsetting them. Think of it this way. It takes 2 booster rockets to get the shuttle in orbit. Once the shuttle is in orbit, they can reject or sunset their boosters. Now all you need is to maintain orbit. No Child Left Behind is maintaining orbit of the shuttle of this system. It is the accountability measures put in place to ensure every state complies. Now here's one of the ways that all 3 pieces of the Goals 2000 School to Work Workforce Investment Act are all part of the single plan. You can't assume they're different ideas. They are all part of a single unit plan. Now, No Child Left Behind, again, as I say, pretends to sunset this. But let me show you how it enforces the national curriculum. It says that the standards are voluntary. We all heard the term voluntary national standards for so long. Well, No Child Left Behind mandates that districts will be held accountable to the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Secondly, they tell us that the National Assessment Governing Board's policy mandates that the content of NAEP reflect voluntary national standards. Folks, when you mandate something that's voluntary, it's no longer voluntary. Right? Voluntary now means mandatory. Change your dictionaries. That's what it now means. Let's move on. Now, I'm going to go through the 3 parts of Shirley McCune's, and I'm going to go through them in reverse. First, the economic connection to education. This is our Minnesota State Education document that explains the 3 circles of this system. Note, it is education reform tied to workforce preparation aimed at economic development. Look at the center, the 3 words in the center: school to work. School to work is the nut that holds the whole radical thing together. Now that has now been replaced with a new term, workforce investment boards. Isn't that convenient in the official documents? But it says that what it means for education is education now is to be keyed to one's ultimate life and work goals. Well, how do you know that? How can you shape someone's ultimate life and work goals through education unless somebody has determined your ultimate life and work goals? You see, in a free society, education is supposed to be a broad-based liberal arts education to prepare for whatever the future holds. This system says, we alone know what the future is, and we're going to retrofit you with what you need to meet those needs. That's the difference between the 2 systems of freedom and tyranny. Now, the document goes on to say that school to work is a whole new way of thinking, a revolutionary approach that will recreate these concepts. Now, when I say it's a revolution, I'm called a conspiracy wacko in Minnesota. Well, I'll tell you what, that's because I'm a property rights guy.